Hello and welcome to the Business of Authority. I'm Jonathan Stark.
And I'm Rochelle Moulton.
And today we're going to talk about productivity versus creativity, specifically for soloists.
Yes, and since we just spent 30 minutes discussing this amongst ourselves, let's see where we go.
Hopefully there's some show left. So this is a thing that comes up in different ways on my mailing list in Ditcherville, where, productivity is good. We want more. I'm for it, right? But then there's there can be kind of, it's kind of like use it for all the things, like do everything as productively or efficiently as possible. And I think, especially as soloists, specifically as soloists, there are things that you probably need to do for an authority-based business, to build an authority-based business, that require you to be unproductive, which is also known as creativity or creative or innovation, those sorts of things that our friend Blair Enns would argue cannot be done. You can't be creative in an efficient or productive manner. And I tend to agree with that.
Well, it's like being delightfully unproductive is kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, it's like so I think a lot of creativity, we could probably go down a rabbit hole just defining the term. But so if I got more specific, if I'm thinking of new ways to, let's just say, run Ditcherville, like some new service I could add to, serve people better, get people more engaged, more connected, decrease churn while I'm at it, we gotta sit around and think about it. And what does that look like? It looks like me walking the dogs. It looks like me washing the dishes. It probably looks like me taking a shower. It's not.
That sounds productive, actually.
But not
for your personal life anyway.
Yeah, I suppose. Right. But it doesn't look like there's no stopwatch.
Yeah. Well, I think the problem, and we were talking about this before, is that in my mind, I hear productivity and a part of my brain shuts off. It's like, that's what I had to worry about when I was billing by the hour in a big consulting firm, and I was being measured by what I did that day. I didn't have enough billable hours, or did I sell enough? And my brain just goes there. And I like the yin and yang of being productive, which is how can I be effective in the least amount of time possible, versus creative, because those of us who get to live this life, we are thinking and writing and probably speaking. So we're doing some combination of those things. So to be able to think and write in this quiet space where I don't care how much time I'm spending on it. I don't care if it takes me an hour to write this one paragraph so that I really explain something that somebody is struggling with. I mean, that's the yin and yang of it for me. I want both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it can be hard to, if you're in, let's say this happens a lot with people when I first encounter them, we sort of cross paths where they're, like you said, they're billing by the hour and they're slammed with client work most of the time. A lot of people all the time. They might have some bad clients that are probably not even that profitable, but they keep them around because what am I going to do if I'm not working, right? So they're trying to be productive. Everything's always client work. And when I say, oh, you should be spending probably 10 or 20 hours a week on other things like non-client work, working on the business, it's like their head explodes.
Exactly.
And folks who, I've worked with folks who really decreased the number of hours they had to work, and they had free time, and they're at like loose ends. They're like, like they're tapping their hands on the table, like I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm losing money. I feel like I'm lazy. All of these and I'm like, well, you could spend that time. And this is what I say to people is like, well, like how do you, the question is usually comes up when I'm talking about getting paid 100% upfront for project work and not tying final payment to sign off. And then a common reaction is, well, how do you know when you're done? And I'm like, well, it's like a lake freezing. You don't know when you're done, but eventually you know it's safe to walk on. So with a software project, and they're like, and so they kind of peter out, and it's fine. you know, and I could get into specifics about how you help it peter out more quickly. But the question that immediately comes up is like, well, how do you schedule projects back to back if you're not sure when they're done, or like, and I'm like, why are you scheduling projects back to back at all? Especially, again, for soloists especially.
Can't have that free space in between because that's not productive. I'm not making money.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. There's this bad dog feeling like I'm letting things go, right? Instead of being busy all the time. And it's really bad. It's really a tough habit to break, or call it a mindset to break, if you've been on the clock for years. And it always felt, probably subconsciously now, like every line of code you write, every 6 minutes that goes by, you're like, oh, that was $10, $10. The meter's just dinging every 6 minutes. And when you get off of that and you give somebody a price and then you're done, whether it's with what you're going to do this particular sprint or the project, you know, you launch the project, and then after that, things are going to tail off pretty quickly. Maybe there's some support, a couple of things that got missed or didn't get tested or whatever, but there's like a scramble right after launch. And then it tails off really quickly because people just they don't feel like calling their software developer and hanging out on the phone to talk about like this report and that report, or whatever. And the idea of like, what do I do now? It's like, now is a great time to work on the business. And what does that look like? It looks like exploring other possibilities. You know, you could just get some input either through books or coaching or communities, and think like, oh, what could I do next to make things better for the kind of people I want to help? And maybe there's a new way to package your expertise. Maybe you've got a new revolution or mission that you're like, oh, you know, it would be really interesting or some new topic to explore, and create this sort of like, you know, to continue to build up the authority business. Because that's what we're talking about. If you're not taking the time to just, I don't want to say zone out. I mean, it can be kind of directed, you know, like I really want to think about how I'm going to, like last year, I spent a ton of time thinking about how I was going to set up workshops so that they would be valuable and also easy for me to execute. You know, a lot of time, a lot of experimentation. Ask me how many hours. I don't know.
Better if you don't count them.
I literally don't know. Like I couldn't even guess 10 or 100. It's somewhere in there. But it was fun. I was in the zone. I wasn't even thinking about time. I love that stuff.
Well, there's also this transition, I think, that happens. Like, you know, you first do your business, and let's take the software developer example, because, you know, you work on these big, you know, long projects, and you just get used to, I don't want to say like being an employee, but you have these assignments that are similar to that. And maybe you're also running around with your hair on fire, and maybe you're the kind of person that likes that feels really good. And then in the peter off stage, which, by the way, when I did M&A work, I hated the peter down stage. Like I just hated it. That was so freaking boring. And I didn't want to do any of the stuff. I wanted to do the next big project. So you may have this sort of mindset about you need to always be busy. And sometimes that just has to be broken. I mean, we were talking before the show. I've not had a problem with that for a long time. And then all of a sudden, my schedule just started getting busier and busier because I was doing, in addition to my day job, I was also president of our HOA in a time of lots of angst, let's put it that way. And, you know, I have a property business where I'm selling a property, and there's a lot to that. And they all came together at the same time. And so now I'm out of all that, everything. I'm out of the office of the HOA. I'm out of all of that. And I had it's been a week, 10 days now. It took me a few days to get used to having my life back. And I did feel guilty for a little bit, like, I have all this time. I should be productive on something. I should be doing something with this. But I didn't. I read a book. Then I read another book, and I went to lunch with some friends, and I had a long phone conversation with somebody else. And so you just have to find a way to shift back and forth between those times where you're really busy and it's relatively quiet.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up the word guilt. You I think need to recognize, or it's helpful certainly to recognize that It's not really downtime. From the outside, it looks like downtime, or maybe it is downtime. But I think there's a thing that I do that looks like I'm doing nothing from the outside. And if you just recognize that that's part of the process, like without that, you're not gonna innovate. You're just gonna rest on your laurels and just keep, which I've done. I've done that at certain stages of my storied career, and big mistake. So you have to do it. I don't know how you could not do it. I feel it would feel very risky to me if someone was like, they just had, they just maybe wrote a book and then it just didn't grow. It feels like not growing. It's kind of like a version of sleep, like from a biological system. Like you need to do it, and just be cool with the fact that that's part of the job, right? Enforce it. I mean, it's a part of the reason why I went back to getting an office, even though I have, like right now I'm at the house and I still do a bunch of stuff from the house, but in order to kind of get into the zone with kids around and dogs around and landscapers and all of this stuff, I go to the office to just like let my mind wander in a business context. It's kind of what it feels like.
Oh, come on. You're sitting there smoking cigars with your feet up on your desk, right?
I don't mind a cigar now and then, but
you know what? You know what? There's a good point in that, though. There's this there's the ritual. There can be a ritual aspect of this, and different people have different rituals. And that the ritual could be like when you've mentioned before that you listen to podcasts when you wash dishes, or you shut them off so you can think.
Right.
Here a ritual sometimes is to just go to the pool when there's nobody there and just soak in the water, close my eyes, and just think. And so I think there can be a ritual aspect of that if it helps you to get comfortable with the not being crazy busy. And, and then there's the flip side, right? Is that there probably will be times when you are crazy busy and you need to be able to go with that versus being overly quiet and still. But there's a David C. Baker's newest book. He talks somewhere in the early chapters. He talks about how lucky we are to have businesses and lives like this, and I just couldn't agree more, because we get to do work with clients that we love, right? Who are our ideal clients. We love helping them. We have this revolution we want to achieve, and we're doing it with our expertise. We're not lifting 50-pound bales of hay, right? We are doing this with our expertise, with our minds. We're exploring, we're listening to people, we're talking, we're generating ideas, and we're making money, sometimes a lot of money doing this. So this is a pretty ideal way of life for the right kind of person. And the price that comes with that is managing that difference between productivity and creativity.
Mm-hmm. What are some rituals that you do or have done besides the pool, which does sound nice, that you find yourself, like, how conscious are you about trying to get into that zone? Or it doesn't have to be you, like it could be student stories or whatever.
Yeah, I gotta think about that. For me, I do like to schedule things, because I feel like it makes me more likely to be either productive or creative, or both. Productively creative. So, like a ritual is I write my weekly article the same way, in the same time, in the same place, and I know when I open that computer, I am so ready. By the time I open it and I'm ready to start, I'm ready to go. Like, I typically already have the idea because I've been thinking about it. So that ritual is that time, that place, opening the thing and doing that. The other rituals are very much just like life rituals, like when I walk the dog. And there's certain things, I don't think about anything else but just the rhythm of the day. And I get these amazing ideas. Same thing with the shower. Same thing with the gym. What's interesting with the gym, though, I never get those ideas when I'm doing cardio. Never. I only get them when I'm doing weights, and I think it's because I'm like, oh, this is so hard. And then I'll just look out, like there's a great mountain view out the window of my gym, and I'll just look out, and I've had several ideas, and I can still remember exactly where I was, what I was looking at when I had those ideas. But it's that putting myself in those spots really, really works for me. And outside, there's something about being outside, and I've said at the gym, and at home, but there's just something about feeling the earth underneath your feet and seeing the sun or the rain and feeling, nature going on around you. It's just amazing.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's pretty common. For me, it's like walking, but not I can't think when I'm walking the dogs because they're too much of a handful. And
you have two, yeah.
Yeah. And one of them thinks he's a little tough guy, so he's got to bark at everything that moves.
Good boy, Reggie.
Yeah. So they're about to make an appearance, I think. But anyway, so for me, it's definitely walking, but alone. Reading, if the book is, it's always a nonfiction book that gives me business ideas, and it doesn't need to be a business book, but it's always nonfiction. And it's wild. Like some books I just can't. I usually listen to them these days, but not always. But usually I listen to them, and when it's I can tell, like, oh, I don't think it's me. I think it's the book, where I'm just stopping it every 2 minutes and making a note.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, it's cool. Right. And so reading is a big one. Walking is a big one. Doing the dishes is a big one. The doing the dishes thing, though, it doesn't take that long. So usually the kind of creative act I'm doing in that 10-20 minutes is usually thinking of like today's email or the Sunday comic. It's not, I'm not adding some new thing to my product ladder or something like that. I'm not, nothing like that. That's more like I need like an hour or two to really get into that place. And when you get in there, it's just like, I'll have like, especially if I'm in the office, which is another spot, because it's so quiet and it's really dark too. It's like my crypt.
That's interesting. So you like the dark helps you.
Yeah. And in fact, when I used to do a lot of songwriting, I would almost always do it while I was walking at night, like late.
You are such a vampire.
Super
I love
duper.
That.
Yeah, I'm a super night owl. What's the other thing? I have a couple of friends who are just, optimistic's not the right word, but definitely abundance mindset, and very optimistic, and like always up for a brainstorming session. They're almost like the kind of people who would be awesome improv partners, where it's like yes and.
Yep.
And there's two in particular that I can think of where every time, or three. Okay, so where every time after we talk, I'm just exploding with ideas, And often I'll be like, the next day I'll be like, that's not a great idea. I was really excited about that, and it was an exciting conversation and brainstorming session, but I'm like, it's either unimplementable or it's the target market is just me, target market of one. But so it's not always that it produces great ideas. It's kind of like unproductive in that way. So, or even like if I'm in the zone in the office in the dim light, where I come up with 5 pages of notes, and then I look at it later and I'm just not energized by it. It like seemed like a good idea in the moment, but I'm not energized by all of the things on there. But I'm like, oh man, that's that one thing that still seems like a good idea, or that's something to explore. But it's a pretty scattershot in all of these contexts. It's a pretty scattershot, inefficient process that's mostly by myself, but sometimes with a partner, and I'm allowing my brain to wander in an area. So I'm not just randomly daydreaming. I'm just wandering around in an area of whatever it is that I'm interested in solving or creating, or, I've got some idea and I'm just going to like chew on it for 2 hours.
Yeah. It's like, I think that this reminds me of something that I see often. It's like naming a product or naming a company. So like you first start in consulting and you're like, okay, I've got this great name. I'm going to call myself, Renaissance Consultants or Cambridge Consulting. Like I get this all the time. I'm like, no. Okay. What you have to do is, you have to think about what it is you want to do. You walk them through like the what, and then the how makes them crazy, because the how, there just isn't an answer that you just reach out and pluck out of the air in 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. You want to think about these things that you want to create and let it roll around in your head. And I'll give them instructions on, opening a Word document and writing down everything that they've thought about and coming back to it over and over and over again. And people resist it like I can't even tell you, because there's so much discomfort in sitting in the not knowing. And it's not like you have to just sit there and think of stuff and sit there for 5 days, all by yourself. No, you just keep adding to it. Think about it for 5 minutes here. Think about it for a half an hour there. Same concept, right? Mm-hmm. Is we just have to get comfortable that time is not going to be productive. Sometimes when it is, it's, the heavens open and, all this wonderful stuff happens. But usually that's because you've been thinking about it and soaking on it, maybe in the back of your brain for hours, days, weeks, months, sometimes years. And that's the sort of the gift or the freedom that we have to give ourselves, is that we can sit and work on something that's important to our business that doesn't come right away. You have to let it sit and marinate for a while.
Yeah. I see a similar thing when I'm working with someone who is thinking about doing a thing. Maybe it's something like starting a podcast or a mailing list or writing a book or even a lead magnet or designing a productized service. It's some non-trivial, it's going to take some of that brain dumping, coming back with fresh eyes, editing, testing. And it's pretty common for someone to say, they'll sort of lay that out and be like, oh, okay, it's going to be, for it to be effective, you're going to want to do a bunch of things, and it's going to take maybe 20 hours, maybe 200 hours to, whatever it's going to take. And they're like, well, is it going to work? I don't want to spend all that time if it's not going to work. And right. It's like, well, it might not work in the sense that it will reach the exact, that your podcast will have 2,000 downloads an episode tomorrow. Might not, or ever, maybe no one cares, but creating it and putting it out there, publishing it or whatever, launching it is the thing that is an educational process, an inefficient educational process that you can't skip really. Sometimes you get lucky and hit a home run, but you generally can't skip it. It's like your ideas, however you're formatting them, need to interact with, like the audience needs to interact with them. They need to be put out in the world. And it's this sort of spiraling into the bullseye process where people don't like the spiral. They want a straight line to the bullseye. And with many, many things, it just doesn't work like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because a lot of times people are willing to do the work, like in that example, I'm going to build a course, but they haven't done the front end work of, oh, does anybody want this? Mm-hmm. And what do they want it to look like? Like, should it be like something that's done by themselves? Should it have a cohort? Should it be done in a week, a month, a day? And so, you go to the other end and then you're like, oh, nobody wants this particular thing. Oh, so there's both sides of that. I mean, some of us will run, and I've done this, run headlong into being highly productive on something without doing the front end work. So there's that balance. It really is a yin and yang when we think about, productivity versus creativity. We need both.
Yeah. So would you categorize things like, I guess it doesn't matter what the category is, but something like a listening tour, any of that market researchy type of stuff, to me that feels like, from a business standpoint, where ultimately, we're talking about, like, there's no way around it. Like, you need to make money, and you want the things that you create to be effective for the buyer so that they're glad they spent money with you and perhaps would come back for more or send other people your way. So you want it to be a win-win, right? You want it to deliver a lot of value to the buyer. So it feels like something like a listening tour or answer bombing or a sales safari, like hanging around in a watering hole, like Amy Hoy says. That, to me, I would classify that as creative, even though you're not creating anything. It's like the very front end of the process of like, how am I going to create value for these people? Well, first I'm going to talk to them and find out what's going on in their minds. And it's not, I mean, yes, you can use Calendly and you can keep to a schedule and the phone calls and stuff, but it's not really efficient. It's kind of messy.
Well, think of it as a spectrum. That's how I think of it, and if we say, productivity is on one side and creativity is on the other, this one is, somewhere in between them. And I would say it's, if creativity is on the right, it's to the right of center, what you just described, the listening tour and that process. Because you have to have I shouldn't say you have to. It helps to have an open mind so that you're really listening to what they're saying versus what you want them to say. So I that's why I push it over a little bit more to the creativity side than the productivity side. But yeah,
there's a lot of unknown, right? You don't know what they're going to say. That's why you're talking to them.
Well, that's what's funny. Or you think you do. I know when I did my first one, I was pretty sure I knew what they were going to say in my head. I was like, oh, yeah, they're going to say this. They didn't say that. They said some completely different stuff that blew my mind. Yeah. Thank God I kept my mouth shut and just let them talk.
I think it was before before we hit record, we were talking about the difference between exploration and expedition.
Yes.
And that feels like you could overlay it pretty cleanly on the same productivity, creativity spectrum, where an expedition would be productive because you know where you're going and you want to get there the best way possible for your situation, versus exploratory, which is, I feel, is on the creative end, where you've got an idea and you're going out and talking to a bunch of people to validate it, for example, or you could be brainstorming it with a mentor, or you could just, be in the windowless office. It's hard. There's something there. It's very similar. It's like you're in exploration mode where you're trying to find out what you and other people might like. You're imagining, or for various ways you're testing, right? Yeah. And then once then put on your productivity hat and bang it out at a high level of quality as quickly as you can.
You lead the expedition. And I think that's also part of the challenge, because a lot of us got where we were because we are leading expeditions with our clients, right? We're saying, I know where we're going. I'm going to get you there. And you do all the things that you do. You get the client there. That's the huge outcome. And it's wonderful. But the flip side is exploring is a way to find something new. The leading the expedition, you're probably not going to be going down the side streets, or what do you call a side street on a mountain, right? You're probably not going to be going there if you don't already know what it is, because you have all these people behind you whose safety you're responsible for. So it's when we lead expeditions for work, like for our business, then I think it's a little bit harder to then shut that off and go explore, but they feed each other so well. That's why I like to think of it as a spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's that shift from having all the answers to putting yourself in a definitely don't have any of the answers mode. I'll bet you that's behind a lot of reluctance to work on the business, those types of things, where it's like, a great example would be, let's say I'm working with a software developer, very, very engineering mindset. They're used to having all the answers. They go into the meeting, how should we architect this solution? Non-technical buyer. And the developer's like, we're going to do all, they say all this AWS, and you're going to do this and sprinkle some AI on it, and it'll be fine. It'll be done in this. They know everything. They've got all the answers. So switching into a mode where it's just like, where they don't, is definitely super uncomfortable. It's like I'd rather go back to my comfort zone where I am an expert. So like, for example, I'm talking to someone like this. I'm like, all right, let's you're not getting enough leads. You told me you're not getting enough leads. And when you do get one, there's a lot of downward pressure on your price because they see you as interchangeable with another software developer or many other software developers, and you seem kind of like a commodity. So let's work on your positioning. It's just like, it's just like, I don't want to do that. Like, just give me the answer. And I'm like, there is no just give me the answer. At best, we can work together to come up with a hypothesis, but then you have to validate it. You have to prove or disprove whether it's the candidate, say positioning statement or tagline or podcast or opt-in page or lead magnet. You still need, like, I can say, like, this is in the shape of something that someone might care about. It's clear, like the value proposition is clear. I don't know if anyone cares though. So you still have to do that kind of experimentation. And it's a really interesting point. Like, someone who's used to having all the answers in their client work maybe doesn't feel so good not having all the answers. Simple as that. It's like, I like having all the answers.
Well, it can be frustrating. I mean, I've had clients where they are so amazing at what they do. Like, they're literally at the top of their field, and they get so frustrated when clients don't buy them. They're like, don't they get this? Don't they understand this? Why didn't they buy this from me, like, right now? And it's that frustration. And kind of to your point, well, let's find out. Let's do some research. Let's ask some questions. Why didn't they buy? Or other times it's just that, it was just not a good personality fit, and you can find that out usually with just a tiny bit of digging. But yeah, it's that frustration because when you're competent and you are revered for your competence, which, let's face it, we're attracting experts here, right? Mm-hmm. It's really hard to let that go and be in learning mode or just receptive mode. You're receiving rather than pushing it out.
Right. Yeah. Huh. I like this angle.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why we had to talk about it for 30 minutes because it's there. I just always have this visceral reaction. Like when somebody says, I'm a productivity expert, in my head, I hear 20 hacks to, get back an hour of your time a day or something like that. It turns me off. It really does. And I was trying to figure out, like, why is that? And for me, it's because I want the humanity part of productivity. I don't want to just work, every second of every day on a rigid schedule to produce something. That's not why I started my business. It's not why I do what I do. I don't enjoy that. But I do want to be productive at the things I absolutely must do so that I can have time to do the other stuff, to be creating and, just creating, not and creating, because that's writing, thinking, speaking.
Right. Yeah. I mean, believe me, I'm like all for productivity when you've got, say, a software project or something you've fixed priced and there's a clear objective and it's like, yeah, all hands on deck. Let's get this thing done yesterday, right? Work really smart, probably hard also, but just get it done as quickly as possible. But it's because you're on an expedition. You're in execution mode. You're like, we know what we want. We have this desired outcome is clear. Everyone's aligned on it. And the financial incentives are all aligned to get it done as quickly as possible without cutting corners. So yeah, boom, bang it out. Use whatever you need to do, tools, use all the leverage you've got to get that done. When that's over, at some point, you're going to you're going to regret if you don't, at some point, shift into creative mode, like exploration mode. Like, what do I want to do next? It could be, if you want to talk big picture, it could be like, I don't even like this job anymore. I feel like it's a job, like, step way back, which we kind of do on an annual basis, step way back and be like, do I need to make a big change here? Am I still energized by this? Could be product service, or it could be the overall business. Maybe you want to start something new, but that's really big picture. But I think it's kind of fractal. It's the same all the way down the food chain. I think for authorities and soloists especially, you should probably be thinking about you got, hours a week of time where you can develop new thought leadership and intellectual property and these things that may or may not pay off. But if you don't do them, it's kind of like the R&D equivalent. So like Samsung or Apple or someone doing R&D, that's the equivalent thing. And maybe it's a little bit difficult when you don't have employees. You can outsource the execution to or the
Oh,
exploration
no,
to.
no, 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 no. Listen, it is so much easier without employees because you don't have to manage stuff that's coming back to you or them. No, do not get employees because you think you can outsource creativity to them.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't do
Just
that.
the thought of it, gives me not a good feeling.
Right. So it feels required to me. I have let it slide. My own, like in the past, I've let it slide and be like, I haven't got any leads in a while. So, yeah. And just to be okay with what looks perhaps to an outside observer like you're just sitting there, right?
Right.
It's important. Air quotes work.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Like somebody else is looking at you going, why are you staring off into space like that? Why aren't your fingers moving on the keyboard? Mm-hmm. Because I'm thinking big thoughts. but that's what we do. I mean, I don't want to make fun of it. It's really important, and we get to do this. It's
right.
like this is the most amazing work that we can do and be paid for. I mean, it's really amazing when you think about it that we get to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you want to keep doing it, spend some time thinking. Yeah. Big thoughts don't come on a schedule.
Yeah. It's like an investment, It's like you can, let it go, but you pay attention. You look at what's happening around you. You look at the marketplace and say, I'm going to put some more money on this one, or I'm going to sell some of this, or I'm going to try something completely new.
Nice. Well, have we left any stone unturned?
I can't think of any at the moment.
Cool.
Can you?
No. Shut this off and go sit in a closet.
I'm in.
Cool. All right, folks. That's it for this week. I'm Jonathan Stark.
And I'm Rochelle Moulton.
And we hope you join us again next time for The Business of Authority. Bye.
Bye-bye.